Do you love McDonald's? Do you love their apple pies and milkshakes? Have you always been curious about what your average McDonald's employee chooses to eat on their break? If so, you're going to love this episode of Loki. And if not, don't worry, the McDonald's stuff is only about 7 minutes. In this week's episode of Loki titled Breaking Brad, we get to see Loki be a villain again, at least for a little bit, and we also get an advertisement for McDonald's. Come on, Kevin Feige, McDonald's? Is Disney really that desperate for money? All joking aside, this episode isn't quite as good as the first. It's not bad, but I felt like they undercut the stakes of the first episode, and certain things I just couldn't wrap my head around. Like the TVA workers suddenly caring, or not just caring, but being distraught, horrified even, that Dox and her rogue hunters pruned all those branches. I mean, what's it been? A few days since it was still business as usual? All of those happy little worker drones dutifully pruning branches, analyzing branches, putting variants on trial, and suddenly they realize that each of them is basically Joseph Stalin. Or maybe Thanos would be a better reference. I'm trying to think of what kind of historical figure the TVA would see as the worst perpetrator of genocide in the Marvel Universe. Maybe someone like Surtur, Odin, Hela, the Kree, the Skrulls, Thanos, Ronin, you get the idea. It just doesn't feel genuine knowing what they were doing not so long ago. They knew they were pruning entire universes full of people. The only thing that's changed is that some of them now know that they are variants. That's the only difference. So their reaction to the pruning of the branches went a little bit beyond the suspension of disbelief for me. But breaking down this episode, Loki and Mobius are looking for Sylvie and hit up London in 1977, which is where Hunter X5's temp pad last pinged. Now, X5 in this timeline is going by the name Brad Wolf, who is either an actor or a writer or something like that. He made a movie called Zaniac, and he's living his life here. This was another weird 180 for me because in the last episode, X5 seemed completely faithful to the TVA mission and to General Dox. He even made fun of Mobius for having an interest in jet skis, but now he's doing everything possible to stay in 1977 and live life as a celebrity, which is also odd since he knew that Dox was pruning all the branching timelines. So unless X5 was from that time, meaning that was his prior life, and he basically just reinserted himself into his past life, then he would have been creating a branch timeline, right? That's how the logic has been explained to us so far. So his motivation doesn't make sense, especially because if he just wanted to live that life, why would he try so hard to keep Dox's mission a secret at the threat of imprisonment and torture? Between the time that Dox and her men left the TVA and now, X5 had found Sylvie, or Dox had found Sylvie. Either way, X5 knew where she was and let her be. So his dramatic personality change doesn't make sense because it wasn't well explained, and his logic behind trying to live his life isn't well explained either, or it's just a plot hole. Dox and her crew, all things considered, were taken out fairly easily, and I guess it sort of speaks to their non-malicious nature. They're simply continuing their work, pruning timelines to maintain the sacred timeline, as Doc said in episode 1. She knows that the timekeepers were fake, but she still believes in the mission of maintaining the sacred timeline. So her motivation makes sense. And logically, her pruning timelines, while evil in the short term, should prevent the cataclysm that is meant to take place as a result of the temporal loom being overworked. Again, by the logic that they've given us so far. So the temporal loom should be fine, at least until it starts creating too many new branches again, which means they've given OB more time to make adjustments to the temporal loom. And that's why I say that this episode's crisis seems to undo all the tension and sense of urgency of the first episode. The major obstacle now is finding missed minutes, because as OB said, he isn't able to open the blast doors and make the adjustments to the temporal loom without either the temporal aura of its creator, i.e. He Who Remains, or the AI Miss Minutes overriding the system. Currently, Miss Minutes is aiding Ravonna Renslayer in her mission to find He Who Remains, which by the trailers probably meant that they went back in time to find Victor Timely, another version of Nathaniel Richards, which also brings up a question. Would the temporal aura of Victor Timely be similar enough to that of He Who Remains in order to open the blast doors? I guess we'll find out in the next few episodes when Loki and Mobius likely meet Victor Timely. Now, personally, I think that a lot of these problems could have been solved if Sylvie just told Loki and Mobius that she had He Who Remains temp pad. But of course, Sylvie is taking zero responsibility for her actions. All she accomplished was creating a power vacuum without a new system to replace what came before. Although now, at the end of this episode, she sees the consequences of her actions, but she still decides to just go back to her McDonald's job and ignore everything. So does she need more convincing, or is she now quietly planning to destroy the TVA? I was wrong about both of my predictions regarding Sylvie in episode 1. The first one being that Loki and Mobius wouldn't find her until episodes 3 or 4, and the other prediction being that Loki didn't see Sylvie in the future. He did see her, but now, by telling her that and involving her in the events of the episode, is he now the cause of her showing up at the TVA in the future? If you remember from my last review how I mentioned that Loki sees a future version of himself in the trailers, so he is in fact creating his own future, therefore creating a time loop, which is the exact opposite of how the Russo brothers explained Steve Rogers going back in time to live with Peggy Carter, saying that he created a branching timeline rather than living in the past of the MCU and simply waiting and meeting the Hulk again after he had gone through time and aged. Maybe because of the absence of He Who Remains, time loops are now possible and a person is now able to change their timeline by going into the past. Something to consider. I really enjoyed the parts of the episode where we get to see Loki once again embrace his villainous side, which included him chasing down X5 and interrogating him. Because I agree with what X5 said when he told Loki that he should go back to being a villain, because he basically ruins everything. He ruins every effort in which he tries to help someone else and be a good person. Loki is much more fun as a villain. He's much more unpredictable. Mobius, on the other hand, was certainly out of character when responding to X5's taunts, not just because he lost his cool, but because he seems adamantly opposed to the idea of trying to return to his old life. The simple idea that his old life might have been good is enough to cause some sort of trauma in which he just turns to his comfort food, that being key lime pie with a lot of food coloring.
You know where I'd go if I could go anywhere, wherever it is I'm really from, and wherever I had a life before the TVA came along. That's what I'd like to do, just riding around on my jet ski.
So what happened to that? Instead, he just falls back into what is consistent and comforting, which is his TVA job. All I'm saying is, he works at the TVA. If he could find out who he was before, he should be able to reinsert himself back into the exact moment he was taken from, assuming that he isn't from a pruned branch. So there were a number of plot holes and motivations that didn't make sense to me. Like I said, it wasn't a bad episode, but certainly not as compelling and well written as the first. There were a couple of Easter eggs that I wanted to mention though. One, there is a poster of the Eternal Kingo, who is a Bollywood star. And then the other Easter egg is that the movie that X5, aka Brad Wolf, made is called Zaniac. Now, Zaniac is a demonic entity from Marvel Comics that takes over people and turns them into superhuman killers. Brad Wolf being one of Zaniac's hosts. Now, Brad Wolf in the comics was not an agent of the TVA, he was just a regular guy, but it remains to be seen if X5 actually did find out his real identity and whether or not it was Brad Wolf, and if his movie is based on something real. Being a hunter, I'm sure he must have experienced many different timelines. So it could be that Zaniac is a real entity somewhere in the Marvel Universe, as in the comics, Zaniac was released from the Dark Dimension by Dormammu, a being we know exists in the MCU, or it's just an Easter egg. Anyways, let me know what you thought of this episode in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.